This room and begin the stream.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order at 4:07 p.m. Monday, April 21st, 2025. Thank you all for being here. Christine, can you handle the roll call?
Sure. MK Sadiq,
Present.
Nikki Smith,
Present.
Ann Hobart,
Present.
Pamela Garvey. Oh, can you come off mute?
Sorry, present.
No worries. Kayla McCoy. A quorum is present. You may proceed.
So there are no minutes to approve. The major lift we did already. So this week is much more about having a discussion. This is uncharted territory for the task force. While it has existed before, after naming or recommending the poet laureate, there wasn't always a lot of work to be done thereafter, at least not after the first year, not after the first one. But then we had the gap. And then after the gap, we came back with Cheryl Walker as the chair. And I think from there, we were trying to figure out how do we celebrate it? And so that celebration ended up being a ceremony, two ceremonies really, at the Rotunda in City Hall, one for LaFleur and the other for Iber. And it was a really great community event. So first, let's go ahead and move into the task force discussions and say welcome to our new poet laureate, Paisha Elaine Anderson.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Uh, so there'll be a time for us to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it, but let's handle a couple of things. First, notifications to applicants who did not move forward. I know that was a thing that Christine so dutifully just created, and I don't know about any of you all, but I did not respond as I should. I just want to acknowledge that in the open, that you did your part, Christine, and I did not do my part. So thank you for doing your part.
Me either, Christine. You did your
And
So that,
I think the grant maker and me did. So
oh, good,
yeah.
good. So that's one. I don't know, Pam, did you get a chance to weigh in? Nope.
No, I had to leave town suddenly and just got back a couple of days ago.
Well, see, that's convenient. Well, thank you, Pam. So so then let's take so I guess the other task force members, let's take a moment and think about that document. Christine, should we do this aloud right now, or should we do this via email?
It's the task force's preference. I mean, I think I can bump up the suggested letter that I provided into people's inboxes just to make sure it's fresh.
Okay.
If you want to do it via email.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it via email. That way we can spend our time here today with the person who is the poet laureate. Okay, cool. So thank you very much, Christine. She'll bump that up, and then we'll just take some time to just review the letter and give our feedback so that we have it on record what we did to notify those applicants who did not move forward in the process. As I mentioned before, there were events after the poet laureate was named and approved by the Board of Aldermen. So for Dr. Castro, it was an event that happened. Uh, I'm not sure. I think, Patricia, you were there. Was it like a week later at the Regional Arts Commission facility?
I feel like yes, it was relatively soon, but that was 2015.
It was a while ago. All right, so
It
that's
was
it.
it was relatively soon. It was within the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Fair enough. So, and we know that when we with LaFleur and then Iber, It was also relatively soon thereafter. So let's think about the swearing in ceremony for the new poet laureate. Let's take a moment to discuss it. I think first let's begin with the logistics. Christine, do you happen to have any updates on the logistics of using the rotunda?
Sure. Yeah, I think that we can definitely plan a swearing in ceremony in the rotunda or the Board of Aldermen chambers. I think the rotunda makes more sense because we can invite more people. And I'm happy, our office is happy to help make sure we can get an event like that planned. And I will say I've spoken to a handful of alder persons who agree that this should not be something that is held behind closed doors, but something that should be celebrated in a way for the public and our new poet laureate's family and friends and supporters to be able to attend as well.
Excellent. Excellent. So then in terms of the timing of it, when do you think we might be able to hear some, potential dates?
That's a great question. I think if the committee is interested in exploring options that work well for all of you, since I think it's important that all of you be there, um, like during the day can be tricky because of aldermanic committee hearings being scheduled since we're in session now. But week nights or weekends can work well. And if you wanted to do something during the day, I will say that most times there's no committee hearings scheduled on Mondays during the day.
Okay. Uh, because we'll have a special person there. Paisha, what are your thoughts on possibly being on a Monday during the day? You're on mute.
Sure am on mute. Appreciating the question. I'm willing to be flexible with what meets the needs of the location. However, Monday is a weekday that people work. Um, I mean, I don't have a preference. I think an evening or like a Saturday would be great because more people could attend. I mean, I guess the inverse of that is that if it is on a Monday during the week, there may be people in the building who aren't there specifically for that, and they would have the opportunity to see and participate. Um, and so what is the most efficient is is the preference. But also Monday's not the first choice.
Fair enough. Anyone from the task force, would you like to weigh in? Go ahead, Ann.
Um, if I remember correctly, I think that Janie's swearing in was done during the lunch hour on a weekday, and I thought that that worked pretty well. Um, because I think that, if people are committed to that, they'll be able to buzz from wherever they are in the city down during the lunch hour to participate or to be there. So anyway, that's just my remembrance of that.
Yep, that is fair. Any other thoughts? Well, we can continue to mull it over. I think right now, at least we have some guidance in the process, right, Christine? So we can kind of figure out what is available. We can look at that noon time for the experience. Not necessarily sticking to 1 hour strictly, but kind of making sure that we get the business of the swearing in, acknowledgments and such happening with a 60 to 75 minute period of content. And then beforehand are people walking in, getting their seats, and then people after then the time afterwards, people are kind of milling around having whatever conversations they're having, but a good 60 to 75 minutes of content. Um, that could be a sit like the beginnings of the plan. So then yeah, so if we flesh that out, we're looking at maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours tops, right? With something maybe 30 minutes before, then we start 30 minutes in, then we have that period of time, and then afterwards, yeah. So it could be, I think it could work. So let's just give that some thought, and if we can make that happen. Paisha, you have your mic open. Any additional thoughts on it, or
I do have a question.
yeah?
I'm a little bit confused about who exactly is in charge of organizing the swearing in. Like
So
who's the
his so
person, who's the
his
contact, who's the
well, I'll just tell you, historically, it was the automatic president's office that did all of that work. Because it's the logistics of booking the rotunda, booking, making sure that we had sound. If there were to be any kinds of refreshments, they handled all those things from like a logistics event planning standpoint. That was all from the automatic president's office. So then we would coordinate. So and technically it would be Christine at the lead, and then maybe anybody else that she has on her team that she'd want to bring in to make sure that this happens. With input from us, but ultimately they're the ones making the calls and booking the things, the makers of the things happening, right? That's that role.
so what about the programmatic piece?
That was more of a conversation between the chair and the automatic president's office. It was a conversation to kind of hash out what that looked like. So you would definitely have significant input in shaping that. So the chair, automatic president, and then the poet laureate. So I think it was like those three that really helped kind of shape it. But in this case, while I do sit as a chair, we do have an active task force, so we can kind of figure out as a body what that might look like, and then kind of go from there. Nick, you have your mic open. Was there something you're going to offer or say?
No,
Okay,
no.
you just got the mic open. That's cool. That's what's up. So, a lot of trust in the room. There's no sound.
I mean, lives here, so it's cool.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So, but that's normally how it would go, and so I can imagine us uh having an initial conversation and then just kind of building it out from there. That way, it's a day that honors you and the poet laureate role, and is mindful of the community that will join in the celebration. Christine?
I just wanted to add quickly, the only other caveat is that our office will have to coordinate with the Office of Special Events to make sure no one else has the rotunda booked for that same time. But other than that, we should be good to go and our office looks forward to supporting the ceremony. We're excited about Paisha being sworn in. We're excited to have a new poet laureate. So whatever our office can do to be helpful with any of the pieces, we're happy to do that.
Okay. Well, I think one of the first things that we'll do is we'll just have to book the space. Once we book the space, we can begin working on the program. And once that program is hashed out, we're pretty much good to go. But that way, we'll have like two trains running at once. One is the logistical piece of it, the other one is the programmatic, making sure that the content of the day flows as we might imagine it. And then we're just kind of off to the races from there. So, yep, go ahead, Paisha,
Y'all know I have all the questions.
as you should.
What about resources and budget? Like, what is the city providing as far as marketing support or programs or food
For the swearing in. Okay.
or is there a budget?
You want me to speak to that?
Yeah, please.
Yes, unfortunately, I think as most of you know, we don't have a budget. There's no budget set aside in the current poet laureate ordinance. I think that's something that is another reason why the task force should consider a continuing meeting to talk about whether or not there are any possible updates to the ordinance that we think might be smart. But I will say, in terms of just like printing programs, we can definitely do that internally without a problem as this is a program of the city. In terms of refreshments, we don't have a budget for that right now, but we can talk to electeds about the possibility of utilizing other funds they have, like with campaign accounts, or, the task force could consider, I would want to consult with our attorney about asking organizations to donate if we want to have refreshments. But I think there's the possibility to make this nice. Many people do not know this, but the city does not even pay for the swearing in ceremonies for the mayor and comptroller. So that's just not something that we've been able to include in budget. So I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that. I just want to remind us all where we are now currently, the fact that we might want to have some conversations about where we might go in the future, but I think we can put something nice and very special together.
That is news to me. So, just out of curiosity, Christine, how are those swearing-ins paid for? Are they through campaigns or how does that work?
It's my understanding they're through campaign funds, yes.
Okay, cool. So that pretty much is an external, like a third party that would pay for these things. And so I think that's kind of like how I understood just supporting the poet laureate in general, but we'll talk more about the support in just a bit. The third party kind of approach to supporting it. Um, hmm, that is interesting, guys. That is an interesting wrinkle. Okay. I don't know. I'm just kind of sitting with it for a bit, but this is a meeting. So I tell you what, let's handle the logistics as stated. Let's figure out the rotunda piece of it. I do remember a couple of things that happened, but I don't remember who may have paid for anything. Now that I think about it, it might have been very much so private, or if there were any additional funds that were available. I'm not sure how those funds were accessed or what the line items for those funds were, to be honest. So that's something that we'll have to consider. So let's figure out the date, and then let's figure out the program. The program will then have to be shaped by the constraints of the budget, and then we can kind of go from there. That is the reality, I think. So, date, time, place. Well, we know the place, but date and time, and then program, and then we'll figure out how far we go with the program itself, the content of the program, based on budgetary constraints. I think that's fair, and that's how it goes. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next item, and which is a very important one: how to support the new poet laureate. Uh, First, let's hear from Paisha, and then I'd want to hear from Nick regarding some of the initial ideas with the onboarding. I think with the onboarding, kind of like the letter, it would be good if it's a back and forth with the task force weighing in on the onboarding as developed. I think right now it's might be in the form of a PowerPoint or some notes. So let's kind of go back and forth before we bring that to light. But in the interim, let's begin with Paisha. What are some of the ways that we can support you in your role as the new poet laureate?
Thank you for this question. What I'm going to share with you is what I have now, but I feel like this will be evolving and ongoing, not just during my term, but and beyond. So this is by no means exhaustive, particularly since we haven't, gotten into the meat yet. Um, in no particular order, but I will save the most important one, I think, for last. So at one point in time, I do recall that there was an office at Hilo for the poet laureate, and I'm wondering if that is still able to be used and designated, or if anyone knows anything about that.
Yeah, so that was a deal that I worked out directly with Chris Hansen of the Kransberg Arts Foundation. Um, and like any sort of thing, whenever an organization decides to go in a different direction with the space, that's completely up to them. But that was, again, a third party solution And that was something that was available because the Kransberg Arts Foundation made it available at the time. I think because of the timing of things, it would it made sense for them to move into a different direction. But again, that's a conversation that we can have with with Kransberg, the Kransberg Arts Foundation, or with any number of organizations that might have space that you may want to partner with in order to make certain things happen. So I think that's on the table and possible.
Would you all be willing to do that? I, have my own relationships, but also want to honor whatever protocols there are that are in place. I'd really be interested in having a posted space there. I have offices all over the city, but most of them are shared. So if there is like just a specific grounded private place, and particularly in that building, given the organizations that are there, and also what the space represents, that would be very helpful. So is that something that you all would have a conversation about, or do I have permission? I'm not really clear.
I want to and please weigh in, task force members, but what I want to establish is that for every poet laureate, they've always had the freedom to kind of run their own shop, so to speak, right? So after they become the poet laureate, whatever sort of contracts they wanted to pursue, they did. I think the ask is simply that whenever there is a civic matter, something that is for the public and for the people, that when that person is asked to present or share a poem or to appear, that they agree to it. Generally speaking, it's been sparing. Hasn't been dominating of anybody's time, but that's kind of been the past approach. So to go through us then kind of creates I don't want to say hierarchy, but it does create something, where as you use the word protocol, it creates a protocol that really wasn't there before. And I don't know if we want to entertain that, if we want to develop that, but that would happen as a result of it. So before I answer you directly, Paisha, let me just kind of open it up to the task force members. How involved do we want to be in the day-to-day of the poet laureate?
I would say for me, I would agree that it does kind of create a barrier to entry if we do have, to your point, I don't know if it's a hierarchy, but something in there. And I don't know that that's the right play. I think that having a little bit of freedom, but also being sure that we're anchored in the expectations of what the poet laureate means and how they are to serve as this in this role for the general public, right? And so you have your, I think most would come into this position with their own brand, their own platform that they would have. And I think that that's fair, right? That's you're a well-known poet in the area. Separate from that agenda, I think there should be some extension of these are the expectations of how do we forward move poetry and literary arts and show up and bridge the gap between those who are disconnected from poetry and those who need to be connected and increasing civic engagement in that way. And so I think that there does need to be some delineation between what you do for your brand and your agenda versus what you do in the role of the poet laureate.
That is fair. Anne, you came off the mic second, and then Pam. Go ahead, Anne.
I agree with everything that Nikki said. I do think that in order for us to communicate the importance of this role and this position, that it would be good to have some baseline structural things in place for the poet laureate. And that includes like possible office space or a place where the poet laureate can hang their hat during the time that they're in there. I know that the last poet laureate was like somewhat, it was the time of COVID, so that it probably was not used as much. And it's a possibility that the poet laureate, as they move forward with their brand, that they may not want or need that. But I do think it's important for us to come up with some of these, like I said, infrastructural things, whether that's space, a stipend on down the road, looking at the ordinance, kind of building some things into it, et cetera.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you probably just said most of what I was going to say. I just, in terms of the space thing, I think it's important that for Paisha, for you, but also moving forward, that there is a space provided for that role. I also would like to echo that we don't need to make things too bureaucratic, too rigid, too formal. I think of us as supporting the poet laureate, right? And so, if you were to say right now, Paisha, well, I've got a really good connection with someone there and, at Kransberg, and I want to call them. I don't think that we should be like, no, we have a process. Like, feel like we should have some flexibility there, but it would be nice to get something established, whether it's there or elsewhere, that would enable the poet laureate now and moving forward to have a specific designated location.
Yeah, patient. I would say in your role as you have these relationships and begin to exercise them in your role, I would encourage you to share back with the task force what's working and what's not in terms of how you've gone about facilitating events or connecting with certain relationships, just so that we have a source of truth and we're building our own knowledge as a task force as well, so that, the next task force, we can pass that on to the next poet laureate.
Yeah, that's fair. And what's one of the things that happened early on, and then I want to get to Christine, is there was a reporting back with Dr. Castro. So we want to for the most part get back to that if we gotten away from it, and I believe we have. And I want to get back to that so that we can build up this knowledge base, especially in support of the poet laureate. Christine.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm having some connection problems, so I'm off video, but just wanted to echo all of the sentiments. I agree with all of them. And if it's helpful information for the task force as they're deliberating, I think it would be good just to make sure that the poet laureate is touching base with the task force on decisions. Because if anything pops up that's like problematic from a legal standpoint for transparency, for public notice, things like that. I want to be cognizant of that. I know one of the things we had touched base about that I wasn't able to get an answer on because we are in a pretty big transition at City Hall is I think it would be smart for the poet laureate to have a city email address. So, Paisha, you're not having to use your personal email to do city related functions. We had talked about the possibility of bringing the library back in. I had spoken to Waller McGuire, who's the head of the library, about the possibility of expanding the partnership past them just posting the application being open for the poet laureate. So I think there's a lot of avenues to explore. Just keeping open lines of communication, I would encourage to make sure that from the city standpoint, we're not unintentionally violating sunshine law or something, other things.
That
I hope.
sounds fair. That sounds fair. Patient?
Uh, yes, really quickly, just I guess a clarifying statement. I appreciate what everyone said about barriers to entry and not wanting to create a bureaucracy. When I said permission and protocol, I was really speaking to that pre-existing relationship that you had that made that office space possible. But I appreciate you all going a step beyond and saying that I don't have to come and ask you every time I do something. That's helpful. So the next two things are hyper specific. One, the social media for the poet laureate is still Janie Iber. And so I'm assuming that Janie was running that herself because she's been posting poems a day, and just how I get access to that. The other thing is I have a question about a press release. I wasn't aware that the other finalists hadn't been notified. I did share this news a couple of days ago on social media. I probably would not have if I knew that. And so I have been asked, like, you know, is there going to be an official something? Is is there plans to do a press release? And if not, we have one. So something official that comes from the office of the president or an
We,
official
Christine,
announcement?
Christine, go ahead.
yep, okay. Yes, I definitely, we are planning on doing something. I did, to your point, Pasha, I was hoping we would get the letter out to applicants before, but that's okay that we didn't. It already is public knowledge because you were voted in a public meeting last week. So I think getting those letters out sooner rather than later is important, but I don't think it's a problem if it's publicized. And I mean, I think, if you're paying attention to the board, you already know that, but I think just as a matter of like respect and courtesy and the fact that we do want to encourage the other applicants to continue participating in literary arts in the city, that we get that letter out. And yeah, our office, and I think I would hope, I would assume that once the new mayor appoints somebody to the task force, because she does have an appointee, that their comms people would be willing to help in the same way. In terms of getting a handle from someone, like a social media handle, we've had issues with that in the city, multiple times, because technically there are not very many handles that people have passwords to. So I get that would kind of depend on people's relationships with the immediate past poet laureate to see if she would be willing to give up that handle. In the absence of that, I think we just create a new one and just make sure that we're sharing that on our public channels as much as possible.
And I'm sure I could get that from Janie. What is the recommendation of the task force? I mean, I think, I'm not sure if this is the same one that was set up way back when Dr. Castro started. I think it's great for continuity if it's the same. Would you all prefer that there's a whole different page? That seems like it might be confusing to me if if there's like 7 pages and they all say St. Louis Poet Laureate.
The issue will be about who actually owns the handle, who actually owns the social media page. Because then that brings in another conversation that would have to be had at some point. So I would say you can begin the conversation, and if Ibra can facilitate that to some degree, then that's a starting point. But I believe it. I don't know if she owns it. I think she was given access to it.
I think she was too. And it also speaks to like what happens in the future. What if when the next one comes, I'm like, no, it's mine. I wouldn't do that, but
No, but that's fair. That's fair. I mean, and that's kind of the challenge. So, uh, not to belabor the point, but we moved from having a media presence, online presence that was external to the St. Louis the official St. Louis website. So we had like the application process handled through another website. And I would imagine social media again through other means. By bringing it into the city of St. Louis and the official uh, web presence for the city of St. Louis, that's created a different sort of structure than we had before. And it's a good one because now there is greater continuity from one task force to the next as it relates to sharing policy, updating the website. I mean, there's a lot of things that are there now that wasn't there before. But I think the residue of that is the social media handle. And because again, that was something that was managed before, and I think Ira was given access to it. So again, you can have the conversation and see what happens. But to your point, long term, the city will need to think about, and this particular task force will need to think about how do we control, not necessarily own, but how do we control? How do we facilitate, and moderate these spaces to ensure that there's access, to ensure that there's information that's getting out, and that when there is a new poet laureate, that there is a transfer of voice and presence. So I think those are things that we'll have to figure out. But just initially, please do have that initial conversation with Ibra and see what's what.
okay, great. So two more uh one more specific thing and then one very general thing. So the email that you mentioned, I know that it would be a city email and I don't know about permissions, but would I be able to forward that to a personal email? I have a lot of email addresses for the various quote unquote professional lives that I live. And so having the ability to just have one less to log into would be great. Um, but I don't know what the rules are regarding that.
I will have to double check with our legal representatives in the city. I do think because of sunshine law that there's always a bit of a concern about roles that are affiliated with the city or part of city government going to personal emails. I mean, I think there's a possibility of it. I don't think it's a problem for it to be forwarded to another email, but I think it might be smart just for you to respond from a city email address. But I'm jotting down the list of all of the things we're questioning, and I can bring all of these things to the city councilor and or our board of alderman attorney just to make sure we have clear delineation about what is required and what's best practice and what's okay or not okay to do. If the task force thinks that makes sense, I can just add these questions and hopefully we'll have an answer by the next time we meet.
I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. We're in an environment where people do make Freedom of Information Act requests. So how do we protect the privacy of a citizen who happens to have a public role with the city government, right? As the poet laureate. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Since I don't know anything about that, I think it makes sense to have those conversations with people who would have better informed positions on that question. So thank you very much, Christine. Paisha, you said you had one last big thing, big general thing.
So muted, not muted anymore. So the big general thing is considering budget. I know that Christine said there's no budget for the event. Um, I'm curious about, because there's different information online about possibilities for honorariums. Um, there's a lot that has to happen to make this thing successful. I know that it was not expressly stated in my interview, nor was it asked um, about if there's money in the budget to support the poet laureate, but I think that is a very real conversation that needs to happen. I just saw last week that Chicago just opened their poet laureate application with a stipend of $70,000. And the only external sponsor they have is the Poetry Foundation. I'm sure that the Poetry Foundation is not giving $70,000. And so as the task force, which is tasked with tasking and enforcing, I just would like to get your thoughts on how we can work together to come up with something that can support the poet laureate financially.
Yeah, I think you did ask in
Oh,
your
oh, go
um,
ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
no, I think it did come up in your interview. I was trying to remember what the response was because I feel like Anne or someone had something about some grants and things being available, but I didn't know if that was to host or facilitate events for, that the poet laureate could facilitate themselves or impatient. So that I'm clear, you're talking about for the purposes of executing the task of facilitating these four events that you may be responsible of, or are you talking about a stipend just for the in addition to and just kind of being in the role and a stipend in that way?
Yes, and I'm talking about both event-based budget and then general. Because also, you know, There's 4 events, yes, that I report back on. That's what I've committed to, at least 4, but there's going to be more than 4. There has to be more than 4.
Mhm.
And not just the events, but the conversations, the emails, the convenings, the all of the
Mhm.
busy work, um, the teaching, the commissions, the civic showing up for the civic events, and all of those things, there's opportunity cost as well. So that's time that I won't be spending doing something else that may generate income.
But they're gonna get extra, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just
Well,
asking about ideas.
sure, sure.
Christine has made it clear that they don't have any that there's no budget. But how can we get to that? Because 2 years is a long time. So we got some time.
Yeah, yeah. I think some of the early conversations when I was recruiting different people to be a part of the task force, the conversation around budget did come up. I will say, because I am nowhere near an elected, although I do like to observe politics in the city, I question the appetite for that. But I mean, Christine knows because she's been in that world in one way or another for a long time. The third party funder, right? This would be through organizations, maybe through private or whatever the case may be. That could be pulled. That could be a thing, but that is always outside of, I think, the role of the municipality, the role of the government, right? It's just something that somehow was facilitated in some kind of way. So we can definitely give that some thought, but as a matter of reforming or revising the ordinance to somehow include a financial aspect or a financial component, I don't know. And I feel like it would be putting Christine on the spot to answer that question. Christine, do you want to weigh in at all?
Sure. I mean, I would be happy to say that I think the conversation is smart to have. And again, I'm not trying to sound like a Debbie Downer, but a lot of it is just going to depend on legally what we're able to do with respect to there being a city affiliated role as the poet laureate and what outside funding is allowed. I'm not really sure how to answer that question because I am not an attorney. I think that talking about adding a budgetary provision in the future, to like tied to an updated board bill that gets passed as an ordinance, is, something that I think most aldermen and the president would be willing to talk about. But I will also say that, the city, every ordinance that passes with a provision to require funding is always, revisited every single year during the budget cycle. So recently, we've had an influx of money from the federal government with CARES funding and ARPA money. But our city budget is typically, the 10 years that I served at the board as an elected official, in not great shape because of the shrinking tax base and everything that needs to happen. So, yeah, I think there's a path forward for discussion. I have no idea about the support or how an updated board bill would look moving forward. But I think it's worth having a conversation about. I hope that helps.
Patience?
So you mentioned, so there are sources of outside funding that wouldn't be allowed because this is a city affiliated. Could you speak more to that? Did I hear you right?
I don't know that the or the terminology is not allowed, but I think that like if somebody who's affiliated with the city in a city role receives private funding to implement or execute a city role, that's a conversation for attorneys with the city to make sure that we're doing it correctly.
All that I can say is that when Dr. Castro was brought in as poet laureate, there were at least one organization that created or provided some sort of funding for his work. And I do recall that when LaFleur was named poet laureate, there was there was an organization that did regranting that was not the Regional Arts Commission, but did regranting to some degree that provided some funding for LaFleur. I'm not sure if it was a stipend, but they did serve as a bit of a pass through, or they were able to raise funds specifically for LaFleur. So those are the things I know that have happened. But to Christine's point, I don't know if those were the right things to have happened, but that's what has happened historically. And if you recall any of those things, then yeah, that's wise because there's always been a third party, that stepped in and filled that gap. And I mean, if you look at the history of how certain things have happened, it's always been possible for a third party to come in and provide funding. I mean, just in terms of the history of it, I'm not sure where we are in terms of legality, but there is a history of third party stepping in to fund things that were managed by a city agency of some kind. Now, technically speaking, the poet laureate is not an agency, right? So we would have to figure out, and I mean by we, I mean Christine. Christine will have to figure out what does that mean? Because you're technically an individual who's serving as the poet laureate and not the head of an agency, right? That's a part of city government. So I think those are great clarifying questions to have on the table, and I appreciate all of the hard work that Christine will do. Any other thoughts on this conversation? Because again, the city has engaged the private sector, has engaged different organizations in the past on supporting different efforts. That is a thing that's even currently at play. So I mean, those things exist. We would just have to figure out what we can do to support the poet laureate in ensuring that if there can be dollars or gifts that we are um, in alignment with the ordinance or generally how the city government needs to function. So, any other conversations around this? Because it sounds like if there's a reason to continue to meet, it'd be this one to ensure that we have support. But any other conversation around this particular point of supporting the new poet laureate? And
I'd like to, and tell me if I'm crazy, because, you know, we're all busy people. But once Christine has laid out some of that groundwork on how and who third parties can support this position, I'd be in favor of us getting together in a room, like in real life, and kind of just like brainstorming the kind of ideas where we could like look for support for the poet laureate, and in particular the current poet laureate who is about to be inducted.
I think that's fair. And also, again, this is somebody else's budget, but there is something to be said about organizations such as the St. Louis Public Library and what resources they might be aware of or have at the disposal in terms of supporting a St. Louis resident who is also the poet laureate in this particular poet laureateship. So I think, yeah, I agree with you, Anne. Having at some point a conversation around it is important. So I guess that'll be on the list for upcoming meeting, hopefully sooner than later. I know one thing I would like to see for the poet laureate is um, some sort of gathering. It's going to use a really general term here, but a gathering where let's just call it the literary arts infrastructure for the city of St. Louis, as well as maybe beyond, can come together and we can have a conversation around the strength of our discipline in St. Louis and how we might be able to support the poet laureate and anybody who serves in that kind of role in the future, whether it's through in kind or something else. But bottom line to it, I would like to see a gathering of that magnitude. Um, and not necessarily as a series of events, but specifically around this conversation around about the direction that the city is going regarding the literary arts community and how we might specifically support a poet laureate. So that's something that's on my mind, and I hope that is something that we can get to sooner than later as well. Yep. All right. Any other conversation? Because we're almost out of time here.
I will say that we are the Regional Arts Commission. We have the pop-up space at the Foundry, and um, RAC can make that space at the Foundry available to the poet laureate and any kind of like, community meeting or anything that we would want to do, or events, workshops, whatever that, and depending on the schedule. So we can do that.
Yeah. So I can speak to real quick the couple of slides. I put together a couple of slides. Okay, I don't know if I'm not going to show anything because I know
Sure,
there's still a lot of discussion. But essentially, for Peja wanting to be sure that you had a single source of truth for where you could look to for questions on frequently asked questions, right? On funding, office space, grants, any other resources. And so I started to pull together just a few slides today to kind of just walk through what are the expectations of the poet laureate, what are some great next steps, for you to do, like selecting your theme for your next 2 years and things like that. In addition to kind of this living, breathing document of where someone could go for resources, and we would be compiling them as we learn, and as you learn, this document would grow with us. And so there's a lot of discussion that we need to have as a task group to talk about the contents of it, but just so you know, patient and others who haven't seen it, that's something that I kind of just been working on throughout the day today.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're absolutely excited to see that, Nick. So we'll get into it and we'll share it, and we'll figure out the timing of all the things. But I think that should be a priority for any sort of upcoming meeting. And to that point, upcoming meetings. We have been up until this moment, we've really been meeting on a regular basis, maybe weekly, or maybe we'd let like a week lapse, but then every 2 weeks, it just depended on what we needed to accomplish. We're at a different stage now. And so we can figure out what our meeting cadence needs to be. And I think that, for example, as a task force, we can complete the onboarding document that Nick is leading, but then share the contents of that document in a meeting so that people are fully aware, like publicly aware of what we're discussing with the poet laureate, for all transparency, right? So that's the thing that I think we could do. Is that okay, Christine? Like if that way we don't have to wait until the meeting happens to have this onboarding, we can effectively share the document that serves as an onboarding and then do a meeting to follow up. So for the public. But the bottom line to it, I think we need to figure out what this regular meeting cadence needs to be. So at this point, do we want to, and certainly Christine weigh in, do we want to settle in on a monthly cadence for our meetings? And it seems as though Mondays have worked. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think at least initially setting the schedule once a month, because there's just a lot of work to do in the beginning,
Yep.
would be helpful. And if we need to pare back or add meetings, we always can, but at least there's something regular that all of us can expect on our calendars.
Perfect.
The task
Uh,
force is in effect for 3 years. They were, yeah, since from when they were appointed. Mhm.
yeah. So yeah, that's that, so we represent the body that ensures that the poet laureate process in terms of selection and recommendation happens. And now the added function of making sure that it's supported, which makes sense because that was the thing that we really didn't do before, and as a result, as well as other factors, it kind of fell off. And so I think it makes sense. So I think monthly is fine. Right, today is the third Monday of the month. Do we want to stick with a third Monday? Do we want to go to a second Monday? Something like that. Any thoughts as to when?
I don't have a preference on second or third. I'm not gonna know which one it is anyway. Just
Sure. Paisha?
Is there an expectation that I attend all of these?
No, I don't think so. Anne, Pam, any thoughts? Okay. Cool. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go with maybe the second Monday. Is that all right? Let's go the second Monday. So we'll reconvene the second Monday in May. In the interim, uh Nick and her fearless leadership will continue to like pull together this document and then she'll share it with the task force members. And if we all feel good about it, then we can not only share that with Paisha, we'll also share that with the general public and kind of go forward from there. I think the big question about how we support the poet laureate financially is on the table, and I think we'll be ruminating on that for quite a bit. Um, so that seems to be a through line for all of our upcoming meetings. Is that fair? All
yeah,
right.
and real quick for the group to know, so when I send this, so I created it in slides in Canva, but what I'm gonna do is send you screenshots on a Word document with a column on the side for your comments. And so there are moments where, Paige, you said, I need answers on this or that, and I've marked them down. And so I've actually already had some of that in the slides as well. And so each of us can just go through, each of us on the task force can go through and just fill in the gaps. The Foundry, Krasingberg, wherever we want to dump information into, and then I'll compile that into the actual slide and do the design of it all, and then I'll share that back in our next meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah,
Nikki, do you need Paisha's email address that she,
I do. I do.
okay. I'll send that to you to make sure she's included on all of our, and Paisha, I'll also share you on the Google Drive folder that everyone else has access to.
Right. And with being mindful that Pam is not using the Google Drive folder, so we'll want to think about how we continue to have Pam's voice heard in these spaces, these Google streets, as they might say. So, all right, I think that's it. Any announcements or any further things to discuss? All right, I'd like to call for a vote to adjourn.
Mhm.
Can I get a motion?
I
Move to
move we adjourn.
That's
Uh, Second. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much. And I will see you next month.
See you then. Take care.
All right, bye.